just continue from where we left last week and maybe just recap one or two slides just to ensure continuity. So we discussed some of the theoretical concepts and then how Hadoop works. So from a user's perspective, a job is submitted to what is called as a master, and then the master accomplishes the work by submitting it in turn to the various slaves. So the responsibility of the master is to, on one hand, interact with the user, and on the other, divide the work and split it among the slaves. And slaves are the ones which actually perform the job. And at the end of the slaves performing the job, whatever is the output that is generated is passed on to the master, and the master is the one which collects it and syncs it up, joins it up, arranges it if necessary, and gives it back to the user. So we also saw in the same context that there are 4 processes, or what are called as daemons, which run in order for Hadoop to function properly. And 2 of these belong to the HDFS functionality, which are the name node and data node. And 2 are the ones which run for yarn. So one way of classifying these 4 daemons or processes is to split them into 2 categories based on who uses them. So these 2 for HDFS, these 2 for yarn. And the second way to classify this is which ones run on the master and which ones run on the slave machines. So if we use that type of classification, then we can say that what run on the master are name node and resource manager. So name node runs on the master for HDFS. Resource manager runs on the master for MapReduce and yarn. Okay, so these 2 are master processes, whereas data node and node manager, these 2 run on the slaves respectively for HDFS and yarn or MapReduce. Okay, so just to repeat, these 2 are the ways for classifying the Hadoop daemons. First type of classification is the functionality, or for which type of Hadoop processing do we use them. So these 2 run for HDFS, these 2 run for map, reduce, and yarn. The second way to classify is which ones run on the master, which ones run on the slave. So using that type of classification, we can say that name node and resource manager, these 2 run on the master, data node and node manager, these 2 run on the yarn. So we'll now see some details of how these processes are used by HDFS and yarn. Okay, so when it comes to HDFS, what happens is HDFS name node, just to go back to our earlier slide. So HDFS name node is our main node on the master. Data node is the one which runs on the slaves. So the name node is the one which is responsible for the creation of any data file and also accessing it whenever the user requires it. So the name node which runs on the master, okay, so the master name node keeps track of what blocks make up a file. So for example, if let's say we ask HDFS to create a large file containing many GBs of data, let's say, or even TBs of data, then HDFS will pass on that command to name node. Name node will see which data nodes are available, and accordingly it will decide to split this file into several blocks, and then it will keep this file on several data nodes. which will contain one or more blocks. Now here, when we are saying block, it's not necessary that these two blocks belong to the same file. Okay, these blocks could be for completely different files or data sets. So the name node is the one which will decide which blocks should go for which file or which data set on which data node. So this is like the decision maker. So it will keep pointers for every file, saying that for file, let's say called as customers, there is one block here and one block here. And let's say it also says that for a file called as orders, there is one block here and two blocks here. Okay, so how the files are organized internally, it's entirely up to the name node. All it does is makes use of data nodes in order to split and store the files. So the name node communicates with data nodes, which are the processes that actually hold the blocks in the cluster. Metadata associated with each file is stored in the memory of the name node for quick lookup. So the information about files is here, but the actual data is on the data nodes. Naturally, if the name node stops or fails, the entire cluster will become inaccessible, because we interface with name node through HDFS. But if the name node itself fails, then just having data blocks on data nodes is not useful, because we simply don't know what data is stored where and how to access it. Only name node can do it. Therefore, it's important that the name node is up and running, which is also why you will see that this diagram carefully shows here multiple masters, which means that in case one of the masters is not working or has failed, then maybe there is a standby, because on the master daemon or master process, we know these two things will be running, name node and resource manager. So if master fails, name node fails and resource manager fails. And if name node fails, all the data nodes are useless, right? Which is why the name node on master is considered to be the most important HDFS function or HDFS process. Okay. Then what about the second master, which is resource manager? So again, to put this in the context, resource manager is our second master, which is for yarn and MapReduce. So we know what name node does. So let's see what resource manager does. The resource manager arbitrates resources among the competing nodes, and it keeps track of live and dead nodes. So in simple terms, whenever, let's say, we submit a MapReduce job, it will be picked up by the resource manager. And the resource manager will then use the resources on what we call as the node managers. So node managers, remember, are the slaves. Again, node managers are the slaves for yarn and MapReduce processes. So just as name node uses data nodes, resource manager uses node managers. So these node managers are responsible for running the user processes, then making sure that there are what we call as containers. So container is nothing but an equivalent of, let's say, a fully ready type of process. So container will have its own, let's say, CPU time, it will have its own memory, it will have all the resources which a process in an operating system normally has. So Hadoop uses the terminology of container. So think of it like a process in an operating system. Here, container is, of course, only for Hadoop. So in other words, if, let's say, we submit a job The resource manager will pass it on to one or more node managers who will have containers, which means our process will run here, for example, and our process may also at the same time run here. And if it's fairly large, it may also run here. Okay, so it will have its own memory, it will have its own CPU time, it will have maybe the disk utilization requirements fulfilled. Anything and everything that the process requires in order to complete will be there inside the container. And then, for example, here we are now in the MapReduce job, we are now requiring access to a particular file. So we have submitted our job to resource manager, who has given it to the node manager, who has fired or used a container which requires a file or a data set. Then the container will pass on the request to the name node saying, I need access to this file. Name node will look up where is the file located, get that block, and then will not actually bring the file back here, but instead it will take this container, that is the process, to this block. Because as we know in Hadoop, what happens is the data does not come to the process. So name node will not bring the data and give it to the container. No. Instead, once resource manager passes the request to the container will see which file needs to be accessed, and it will actually go to the name node saying, I need access to this file. And name node will take this container, that is this process, to this data node, this block. And which is why this is where, let's say, the processing will happen, and whatever are the results or the outcomes, the container will then send it back to the resource manager, and the resource manager will return it back to our code. Okay, so this is how these four processes, name node, data node, resource manager, and node manager, work with each other in order to accomplish a task. And as we've seen, this is also why if any of these is not starting but failing, Hadoop doesn't function as expected. Hope we now know why, because unless and until your yarn resource manager is accepting your MapReduce requests, there's no point in doing anything further. And if it is running, it has to get the work done from node managers. So node managers also have to be running. And node managers in turn will go to your name nodes for file requests, which in turn will go to the data node to fire the request on that data. Naturally, all the four have to be active, up and running. Okay, this is why we are making this statement. These four daemons run for Hadoop to be functional. Any questions? Okay, how many of us are clear about it now? While you are raising the hand to indicate you have understood this, one point which I think needs to be emphasized. Some of us actually get confused, not just in this subject, but in general, as to at what level should we stop in terms of attempting to understand. That is this level of understanding sufficient? And ideally, of course, we would want to go to the lowest possible level and even see how these internally work and what exactly happens inside these processes, but then there is no limit to uh, what we wish to understand. So in the case of Hadoop, the level at which we would consider ourselves to be adequately clear about the topics is actually this level. In other words, anything which happens below this will be the responsibility of the system admins. So we should know, for example, how to install Hadoop, how to start the processes, and what sort of problems can come in during the installation and startup process. And then subsequently, obviously, the application programming part. But anything other than this, in terms of how to optimize, let's say, the Hadoop uh, processes when they are running, how to increase maybe the parallel nature of running these jobs, okay, or any other system related issues, operating system installation related issues. There would be people who would be trained to resolve such problems, or it would actually be their responsibility. It would, of course, be nice if we also know those things. Okay, so you're not saying that it's not absolutely required or you are prohibited from understanding it, but that's not necessary, really. Okay, so it's like saying that in the case of RDBMS, for example, once we know what RDBMS is, how to install it, how to solve the basic problems, how to get it up and running, let's say MySQL client and server, that's where our responsibility will end. And then anything over and above that will be the responsibility of someone who is trained to handle such things, such as a DBA. So something similar here will happen in the case of Hadoop. So what we also need to understand besides this is how does Hadoop actually store data? Okay, so how does HDFS, for example, uh, save or store the data that we give to HDFS? Okay, so let's say we give HDFS a file which is quite large, say 100 terabytes. Then, as this nice animation from Dataflare shows, it will actually divide this file into chunks of 128 MBs each and call each chunk as a block. Okay, so this term block had appeared even in one of the previous slides. So a block is nothing but it's actually data of 128-bit MBs in size. Of course, except for the last chunk of the file where it may not be 128 MBs because the file actually ends there. And all these blocks are actually created by the master, and the master then spreads those blocks around the Hadoop cluster, that is the slaves. So it naturally keeps a list of which blocks are stored on which slaves, and not only that, it also makes sure that in order that we have the possibility of some slaves failing, uh, maybe the disks failing, something going wrong, it also ensures what we call as fault tolerance by repeating certain blocks on certain slaves by way of replication. So if, let's say, it has created 10 blocks, let's say, okay, not a very large files, not 100 TB file, but a smaller file. So let's say it has 10 blocks. Then what it may do is it may put block number 1 of this file here as the animation shows, but it may also put this same block, okay, block number 1, on other slaves. For example, see here, okay, it has also put the same block and somewhere else. Same will be true for block 2, block 3. So how many replications, that is how many times should one block be copied, will again be decided by the master. Generally one backup is created so that in case, let's say somebody asks for this file and the master knows that the file is stored here and attempts to access it, this block number 1, but for whatever reasons it's failing, then it will quickly go to the other slave wherever it is located. And it also means that the same slaves could have the main copy, let's say the master copy of a particular block and the backup copy of something else, and master copy of something else could be here also. So it's not necessary that the slaves, some slaves only have backups. Okay, they may also have what we call as the main copy or master copy of a particular block. Okay, of course all these will be recorded in the master. So the master will decide among the various copies available for a block 1 which is the one that it would normally access. So normally it would go here, but in case of failure it may go here or here. Okay, so this is how it achieves fault tolerance. And again, in real life, since these slaves are going to be distributed, so this is obviously not one single machine, and that too probably in cloud, chances are that even if one of the slaves fails, we do have other backups running. Since in our installation we have just installed the whole thing on a single machine, wherever we have successfully installed Hadoop, we don't see all these effects. But in real life, that's what will happen. And that's how, even if there are problems with some machines, we still continue to function. Okay. So this is how it will look like. For example, node 1 has file 11's block 1. Node 2 also has file 11's block 1. Node 3 has also file 11's block 1, but node 4 doesn't have it, which means that file 11 block 1, this let's say is the main copy and these two are the backups. Similarly, for file 11 block 2, this could be the main entry, and as we can see, here is a backup and here is the second backup. Like this, for every block, okay, there'll be one main copy here and maybe two backups, okay, in this particular diagram, right? So using such mechanism of backups and distributing the backups across different nodes, different slaves, HDFS ensures business continuity in case there is a failure. Okay, so just skip these slides. I think we have actually covered what I wanted to cover in the theory, because MapReduce we have already discussed, and in the case of Yarn, it's far more technical, which is something which I don't think we need to discuss for your syllabus. Right. So any questions about the functioning of Hadoop and the topics that we have discussed? Okay, what I'll do is, in the meanwhile, I'll just see which case we take up next for our hands-on. Okay, now we also know how it works behind the scenes, but before that, I'll just complete the attendance also. Okay, so we'll go back to our hands-on work now. So you can maybe go back to your folders, okay, wherever you were trying out the earlier examples. Okay, just complete the attendance. Division A, PRN number 1, 2, 3, 4, 6,
Present, sir. PRN 6.
9, 11, 15,
Sir, PRN 9. Sorry, sir. PRN 9.
okay, 11, 15, 16, 18, 23, 28, 37, 38,
Present, sir.
sorry, it was 38, right? Ritik, are you there? Forty, 41,
Present, sir. 41.
44,
Sir, 28 is also present.
okay, 44, 46,
46 present, sir.
48, 51, 2,
Yes, sir. 52.
53,
53 present, sir.
4,
54 present, sir.
56,
56 present, sir.
59, 60,
60 present, sir.
61, 64, 69,
PRN 69 present, sir.
70, 71, 72, 73,
73 present, sir.
74, 75, 76,
76 present, sir.
77,
Present, sir. 77.
78,
Present, sir. 17.
80, 81, 84,
Sir, present 84.
85, 87,
Present, sir.
89, 91, 92,
Present, sir. 92.
95,
95 present, sir.
96, 97, 98,
So 98 present.
100,
100%, sir.
103,
Present, sir.
104, 105, 107, 108,
Present, sir.
109, Okay, those are put the attendance in the chat also. I have marked. Division B, we are in 5,
Present, sir.
7,
Present, sir.
8,
Present, sir.
10, 12,
Present, sir.
13,
Present, sir.
14, 17, 19,
Present, sir. 19.
20,
Sir, 20.
22, 24,
Yes, sir.
26,
Present, sir.
27,
Present, sir.
29,
Yes, sir.
30, 31,
Present, sir.
33,
Present.
34, 6, 39,
Present, sir.
39 present, sir.
46 present, sir.
43, 45, 47, 50, 55, 57,
57 present, sir.
58,
Present, sir.
63,
Yes, sir.
65, 66,
Present, sir.
7,
Present, sir.
8, 79,
79 present, sir.
82, 83,
83 present, sir.
86,
86 present, sir.
90,
90 present, sir.
93,
93 present, sir.
99, 101, okay. Just a minute. All right, so we'll go back to our examples. And again, we'll start with maybe something simple and then increasingly uh, add the complexity a bit. Okay, so I'm sharing the problem statement, and I'm also sharing the data file. Okay, so using this particular data file, the first set of code is fairly simple, which is to list all the centuries. That is player name, runs, opposition, ground, and date. And you can look at this particular data file. So once you complete this code, actually quite simple. Just share with me on the individual chat. Any questions, anything not clear, please ask. Shubhavi, are you getting the correct output? Have you tried running the code? Okay. All right, try completing this and send me the code once you complete. We'll take a break and we'll resume in another say 10 minutes from now, so around 9:10. Hey, anyone else who has completed the code? I haven't seen anyone sending me the code.
Can you working on it? So just 2 minutes.
Okay, all right. Okay, those who joined late, as I said earlier, for whom I marked absent for the first session today, I marked those of you present for the second one. Okay. Not taking a separate attendance, I'm just going by Microsoft Teams. Yes, Rahul, I have already done it, so there is no need to mention the PRN number. Okay. Yes, Akash, I'm going through the responses that some of you have sent, so I'll check yours also.
No problem, sir.
Okay, so it is a bit tricky, although it seems to be straightforward. So far, Akash and Kushan, I think, have sent it correctly. Well done, both of you. Akash Seth, okay, and Akash Goyal has also sent it, so I'm checking it now. Okay, Akash Goyal's code is also correct. For those who have sent me the output and the code and where it's correct, here is the second problem for you. List all centuries from the highest score to the lowest. The details that we require are player name, runs, opposition, ground, date. Not so difficult, especially if you have completed the first one. This should be quite straightforward. These are the kinds of problems or challenges that you will face in real life situations. So people will not give you very clean data or data that has absolutely no problems. So you will have to figure out what is the problem with the data with respect to the required output, and as a result, wherever you have to run, you will have to either write code which will clean your data and then it will give it to your MapReduce function, or whether you want to do it as a part of your code itself. Okay, so it will again depend on what the organization asks you to do or whatever is the standard there. But in any case, point is that data may not be very straightforward. Okay, so you will have to find out ways to clean the data whenever you are faced with these challenges or situations.
So,
Yeah,
so the same code could run for this as well, right? Because only so when we use the sort function while piping, we are initially checking by the name. Now we can check by the number.
yes.
Okay.
That's why I said if you have been able to write the first one, then it's fairly straightforward. Okay, Nibir, can you walk me through your code? I've opened your mapper file.
Yes, sir. Actually, what I'm doing is assigning a variable as one, and if the variable is one, I'm just skipping that line so that I can go to the next iteration of the for loop, because the first line is the headers. That's why I'm skipping
Okay.
this, and I'm
Okay.
just I'm printing it. It's the standard out. That's it. Whatever
Okay.
variable I need.
All right. And in the reducer code, then you are checking whether the data of one has hyphen.
Yes, sir. Because I saw the data and there's some data is coming with hyphen and some data is blank in some sections. That's why I'm checking for that. And if I'm getting that, I'm skipping that iteration for that.
Okay.
And if there's
All right. And if you run this, it's printing it correctly for all the hundreds centuries.
yes, sir, it is printing everything. But I'm not sure if I'm going to the whole data or not. And I've checked the whole
Yeah, it
data
is
for that.
difficult to judge because there are too many records. But fine. I mean, if you are not seeing any obvious problems in the output, it should be okay.
Yes, I'm not seeing anything.
All right. Okay. Well done. So I've added the third question also to the chat for those who have completed 1 and 2. Okay, let me now explain the first program for those of us who are not able to write the code. I understand that it does have some challenges. As I said, it's not a very straightforward uh, simply read the data and print type of code, unlike the earlier examples. And just to repeat, these are the kinds of examples or challenges that you will have in real life, and which is why I took this example. So I'll just explain what we do in order to sort out these problems. And this is not the only way. Again, some of you have written it differently. All the approaches are okay as long as they work. Okay, so I'll just share the screen and walk you through one such approach. So here, what I have written is simply next of sys.stdin, because as we know, the input file has two records or two lines, okay, which are coming here as the headers, okay. So while interpreting, I have, I think, had another header, so I've written it twice. If it's only one line that you see, you can write only once. Okay, so depending on how many header lines your code gets, you will have to write it like this. So some of you have written some logic in order to handle this situation, which is also a very good innovative approach. For example, what Nibir had done earlier. But there is a simpler solution which you can always use, which is simply say next, so that it will skip the current line for as many lines as you require. And of course, you can do that even during your for loops execution, in case somewhere you find that there are lines which you wish to skip on certain conditions. Okay. Then, as usual, we read the line, then we split it on the basis of comma as the delimiter. We look at the fields which we wish to pass to the reducer. So there's nothing different here. Again, another challenge that many of us may have is we get overwhelmed because there are too many fields or columns here and too many data rows, which is why I gave you this example. So this file has so many columns and then it has a huge number of rows. So that really sometimes overwhelms us. So here, for example, we have 72,843 records. Okay, and in real life, we'll actually have even millions of records. So that should not really make us lose our confidence. Let there be as many records as they exist and as many columns as they exist. We should simply focus on what we want to extract. So we want to extract here, let's say, the player name, the runs scored, the opposition, the ground, and the date on which the match was played. And then how do we make sure that we only pick up clean data? So there are, again, maybe many approaches. Two of them, I would say, are the simplest ones. First approach is you actually identify what are the problematic areas, okay, in your record. So when I went through it, I found that there are things such as did not bat, that appears somewhere in the score. Or see here, for example, I think there is nothing. Okay. Here, for example, we have did not bat. So it's not a number. So all such possible conditions, either you can check. That is the first approach. The second approach is maybe the mapper code simply blindly passes on whatever it gets without worrying about whether it is numeric and whether the data is correct. So it simply passes it on to the reducer, and the reducer checks whether after it goes through this line, does it find the run scored as numeric? And if it finds that to be numeric, only then it checks whether it's a century. Okay. So I'm not saying either of the approaches is wrong, or you can even check that in the mapper itself. So here itself check whether after you parse this, check whether the run scored field is numeric here. And only if it is numeric, then write it to the reducer code. Otherwise, simply skip it. Don't do anything. Okay, so you can try all these approaches, see whichever one is easier for us, and whichever one works at the most optimum level. But if we can't optimize, I would say in some cases leave the optimization alone. It's okay even if you can't optimize. It's important to first get it working. Okay, and then if you can optimize it further, of course, well and good. So this is how we overcome the problem. So whenever we have to skip unwanted lines, we can simply say next, and the line name. If you don't want to do it also, simply because you are checking for the numeric value here, anyway, the header line will also be skipped. Okay, so just by checking whether it's numeric or no will actually sort out almost all the problems. And this is how we only pass on the records of our interest to the reducer code. In this case, the reducer code actually will turn out to be maybe simpler than the mapper code, which is a unique case, because usually the mapper code simply passes on everything to the reducer. Okay, and then what do we have in the reducer code? Is pretty simple because we have done all the filtering in the mapper code. The reducer code, we simply read whatever mapper has passed and check if runs code are greater than 99, it means it's a century. So we simply print a list of all the centuries. If you wish, you can take maybe a snap of this mapper code and the reducer code. If you have found it difficult to write the code, so you can try this code. Okay, so this is the mapper file. And this is the reducer file. Okay, so those who have not been able to write the first example, don't lose heart. Okay, just because you have not been able to write it. Those who have written it, or
Excuse me, sir. So, I have a question. So in the reducer codes right now, we are actually modifying it. So when we were using the jar thing in the Hadoop, how do we do the same in in that part? So like over here, we are like sorting it if it's greater than 99 and so on. So how we will do it? Will we do it over there in the Hadoop framework?
are you talking about the second example?
I'm talking about the Hadoop framework, the main software installation we did, right? So how and you taught us how to use that mapper and reducer using the jar file.
Yes.
Yeah. So how will we do such type of sorting over there? Like over here we have above 99 and so on. So how will we do it over there in the case of that jar file?
No, here we are not actually doing any sorting. We are simply checking whether the runs code is
Yeah.
greater than 99.
So is there some, parameter for checking over there as well? Like,
No, see, if you are talking about running the first example, then it will run as is outside or inside of HDFS.
okay.
Because we are not running any extra or outside sort step. All we are doing, see, even in the mapper code, just once again open it. In the mapper code, we are simply checking within the code for all these conditions. So we are not relying on any outside sorting or logic.
Yes.
Same is the case with reducer. However, if your question is, let's say in example 2, suppose we use sorting, external sorting.
Yes.
Then your point or your question will become valid. In such cases, what we will have to do is to write our own sorting logic. So we can't write the intermediate sort operating system step, and the sorting will have to be built into our code.
Sure, sir.
Okay, so what I was saying was, those who have been able to write this, obviously well done. Those who have not been able to do it, don't lose heart. It's not so easy also, although it's, I would say, not extremely difficult, but I understand many of you may not have even seen such files or written such types of code. That's perfectly okay. Some of us may have had better chances of writing or would have learned on our own, whatever is the case. So if we haven't done it, this is a time to learn it. So now that we know how to look at data which is not relevant to us and how to bypass it, okay, hopefully we will keep this in mind whenever we encounter these types of situations, especially those who aspire to get into data science, data analytics, big data analytics, these types of areas. Okay, you will have to know this step of data cleaning. Okay, and what we have seen, of course, is just one simple small step. In reality, again, things could be complicated, but it tells you an approach as to how to handle it. Okay. So do complete the first example with the code that is shown to you, and hope you have taken a picture of it. And based on it, try completing the second and third examples. Okay, and if you can, then do send me the code on the individual chat, and any problems you encounter or not able to complete, not able to understand, okay, I'm ready to explain to each one of you, even individually, if it comes to that. But please make sure you do understand, and if you can't, then give the best effort, and even if you can't, let me know. All right, with this, we'll stop for today, and we'll continue next week. There is, I think, still one example remaining from this, if I remember correctly, or I'll even create more examples or codes for us to write, and we'll also take up another example which could be hopefully a bit challenging. So we'll start with something simple and keep on increasing the complexity. Fine. So with this, let's end our session here for today. Thanks for the contributions of those who have made those contributions. Take care. Enjoy your weekend, and see you next week.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.